After talks about imagination and water, imagination and ethics effects, and how could we get idea, this morning is about architecture and city planning. Dr. Liu Thai Ker is a very renowned architect planner. We call him the architect of modern Singapore. He was chief architect of CEO of Housing Development Board, HDB, Housing Development Board, 1975 to 1989, where he saw the completion of over 500,000 dwelling units. He was chief planner and CEO of Urban Redevelopment Authority, 1989 to 1992, for which he spearheads the major revision of the Singapore Concept Plan 1991. Since 1992, he has been director of RSP Architects, Planners and Engineers, a consultancy firm which has projects in Singapore, including this building, and over a dozen other countries. He has been appointed the planning advisors to nearly 30 major cities in China. He is concurrently the chairman of the advisory board of the Center for Livable Cities and also a member of several government bodies in Singapore. He is also an adjunct professor of the School of Design and Environment of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in US, as well as the NTU. End of 2017, Dr. Liu Thai Ker has decided to leave RSP to start his own firm. As he said, "I'm the oldest man to start a company." Dr. Liu is a recipient of several awards, both locally and internationally, including most recently the Singapore National Day Award, the Distinguished Service Order, the Singapore Design Council Golden Jubilee Award, and the Singapore Institute of Planners Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to welcome you this morning. Please welcome Dr. Liu Thai Ker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Xavier. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Looking at the audience, I think I may as well be in France rather than in Singapore. So many foreign students. I'm very happy to see that. So this morning, the title given to me is Future Cities. In fact, the word future is used in Singapore almost on everybody's lips. And I'm certainly in favor of it. But when it comes to city planning, my big worry is that too much emphasis on future actually would do harm to city planning, because urban planner is like a doctor to a patient. Urban planner to a city is like a doctor to a patient. His most important responsibility is to understand the problems and the needs of the city, just like a doctor's most important responsibility is to understand the anatomy of the city, of the patient, and the illness of the patient. So a doctor will spend a lot of time understanding the present, and an urban doctor or planner also, I feel that spends not enough time to understand the present. That is the general trend I'm talking about today. Okay, let me continue. So I've been introduced already, so I will not repeat that. The only thing is to say that this new company of mine is exactly 41 days old. Yeah. And in the past, I was involved in public housing and in urban planning. And the reason I took the stand of what I said earlier, that urban planning is more about present, understanding the present. Because if you understand the present, then you can create something that can have a long-term utility and benefit to the people. So this is the journey I had. I was in the government, and then I was in RSP, and then now I'm in Moral. So my journey was to search for solution, consolidate the solution, refine the solution, then now thinking about what experience I learned, and then share with everybody. And it's partly because of this desire to share my experience that I decided to come out and form my own company. And why am I feeling that I have something that I can offer? It's because most consultants, when they do the consultancy services, like a planning consultant or an architect, after they create a design, they will just leave. And then whether the building or the urban plan works or not, there's no way for him to know, because he's left it to the client and then move on to do other jobs. But fortunately, in my case, after I do the planning and design, I also help the government to develop the public housing, to manage the public housing. And in managing public housing, I get a lot of complaints. And through this complaint, I did a lot of research to analyze what are they complaining about. And what they complain about, one is mistakes we made, two, ideas that we did not think about. So we then correct the mistake and then incorporate the new ideas. And I repeated this process for 20 years. That is a big learning experience. So this, in Singapore, before I became a chief planner, I planned this much of the city, okay? Then I went to chief planner, to be chief planner. So after having learned the experience in HDB, I decided that I would not simply create a plan and administer the regulation. I would encourage the developers to give me feedback. And then with the feedback, I'll analyze their ideas. And again, we discover some of the regulation could be mistakes. Some of the regulations was a bit outdated. So we repeated this process for another 4 years. So this is, and I'm saying this is as an attitude to working as well, because when you receive complaints from the residents in public housing or complaints from the developers, there are two ways to deal with it. One is to pick up the complaint and throw it in the waste paper basket. In other ways is to take them seriously and analyze them. And to be honest, 95% of the complaints are trash, but that 5% can be gems, can actually help you really make a difference to the kind of work you do. So this is the plan I prepared for Singapore, and it's a basis for the urban planning of Singapore today. So Singapore is my urban laboratory. And currently I'm also chairman of the Center for Livable City. I just want to say that as in the last few days, you heard some of the old men like me to tell you about the story, the development of Singapore in the first few decades. And so the Center for Livable City is to interview those people and ask them to record their experience, and hopefully we will in fact we publish a lot of books, and even on the internet you can access them, and then you can learn a lot about the urban experience through the work of the Center for Livable City. So this morning I'm going to take you quickly through many topics, okay? First, as what I said earlier, a city is like a human body. So actually, to create a city is not to do something fantastic, but to understand and respect the logic of anatomy. To my mind, that is the highest form of imagination. And people nowadays talk about future city, they talk about technology and so on. To my mind, those are not applicable to the human. You don't actually invent human body. You don't actually change human body by technology. You don't do the same, you don't do this thing for city also. Okay, so let me just talk about technology and future ready. These are the fashionable words for urban planners. You see, technology to me is only an agent to human body. In other words, they are like vitamin to the human body. They are like the tonics and so on. You cannot use technology to create human body. You cannot use technology to create a city. You must understand the function of a city. Okay, so in the urban planning context, yes, you have modern transportation system, infrastructure, and so on. These are technologies that can be used on the city. But before you use them, for heaven's sake, create the city properly. So future-ready innovation, more applicable to clothing. In other words, because you can have a futuristic look in today's fashion, but 3 months later, you'll be out of date. It doesn't matter, because these things can change. You can change your clothes. You change your clothes every day, it's fine. But you cannot change your body every day. That's the difference between urban planning and this clothing design. So urban planning requires solid skill, intelligent scientific approach. And yes, I'm not denying technology, but you must have that solid skill to create the right city and then use technology and so on to enhance it. I put this talk in context, then you can follow what I want to say later. Now, how did Singapore transform? For those of you who are, because I received many visitors in Singapore, and most of them, after traveling 1 or 2 days, said, Mr. Liu, it's easy to plan Singapore because you have no slum, you don't have squatters, it's easy to plan. Well, I just want to show Singapore in the 1960s. Just 2 slides. In 1960, Singapore could be described by these 3 words: dilapidated, dirty, filthy, poor people, and education and backward. Okay, that was Singapore in 1960. If you don't believe me, 3 out of 4 people lived in this environment in 1960. 3 out of 4. And the fashionable Shenton Way in 1970 actually looked like this. So when you go to Fullerton, the triangular building is a Fullerton Hotel. It used to be a post office. And behind it now you see high-rise buildings. But in 1970, it still looked like this. That's Singapore in the past. And then when you plan the city properly, rationally, scientifically, then in 25 years, Singapore became a livable city, economically prosperous, and education, human mindset became progressive. Only 25 years. If you do the thing properly, you can change it very quickly. And I'm not giving this credit only to the professionals. The biggest credit should be given is the political leaders. Political leaders if they make up their mind to put in the hard work, to do things properly, then the professionals can follow. It's easier for us to do. If the political does not believe in that, the professionals, no matter how competent we are, cannot get anything done. So this picture that you saw in 1970 now becomes this. But what I want to emphasize is that even though, because the tall buildings you see there used to be very bad slum, we had to tear them down. But we also saved some of the buildings. So all the red roof buildings are conservation. They're historical buildings that would not be allowed to tear down. Okay? And even the slum area now becomes public housing. And I would say everyone in Singapore by 1985 would have a home to live in 25 years. What did we do to make the transformation? So I'm going to take you through. Actually, these are all the steps to make the transformation, important steps. But in the interest of time today, I can only take you through the first two steps, okay? One is protection. You see, every city wants the city to be unique. Actually, the most unique part of a city anywhere in the world is the natural environment. No two cities have the same natural environment. So we decided that we keep the natural environment, the important rivers, hills, and so on. And also, almost no two cities have the same historical buildings. You know, if you go from Singapore to Malacca, to Kuala Lumpur, to Penang, the shop houses in Singapore and Malacca and Kuala, they are slightly different. Okay, even shop houses like that. Because in the old days, you build your buildings not by borrowing technology from across the world. You build a building according to the materials available and the skills available in your own tiny city. So this is another source of uniqueness. So in my view, nature is like the soul of a city, and the heritage is like the memory of the city. So Singapore, I urge you to go to see this Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And an English expert told us that this place would have, although it's only 1 square kilometer, would have more plant and biological species than the whole of America, because we're in a tropical area. And because we take care of pollution in the air and in the sea, so the corals in the seas thriving very well. And in the old days, during the British time, only the central part of the city was developed. The rest were just squatters. So we searched through the area and identified the historical areas through some proper measures. And then, so now you have Little India, Kampong Glam, and Chinatown, plus many other places. So we'll study what are the buildings we must keep, and then you get this is Little India, this is Kampong Glam, and this is Chinatown, plus many other places. So when you're in Singapore, please go and visit these places. You know, it's not a city consisting of only high-rise buildings. There are many other interesting places. So if you look from the air, the area you see in this photograph, there are 25 times this amount of land which are preserved as historical sites. So we have to protect. See, when I was doing the master plan, the concept plan of Singapore, I told my staff, mark out all the nature environment that we have to keep, mark out all the historical sites we have to keep. Assume that this land do not exist, and then all our new development would take place outside of these areas. That's how we preserve them. And then in terms of architecture, this is jumping a little bit ahead, is to say that because we value historical building, therefore, modern architecture, to my mind, should be modern, but reflecting the local environment, reflecting the ethnic culture. Unfortunately, I feel that the modern architecture today is universal. Everywhere you go, you see the same designs. You see the same design picked up from architectural magazines. To my mind, this is very different from historical building in the past few thousand years. Every place you go will have different designs. And we should use the modern technology by all means. We should even accept the modern aesthetic theories. But when you design it, then you have to reflect the local environment. You have to then reflect your own culture. And therefore, to my mind, if we do this, then we're preparing for the future. We're having good imagination. Imagination is not looking for the most fashionable design that you can find in the magazines. That to me is not imagination. Okay. So what do we do what are the process in a city plan? Let's just give you some ideas. First of all, we have to set a vision. In 1991, for the 1991 plan, we say that we have to move, because even at 85, when I told you that we had a modern city, but we wanted to be an excellent city. So we want to move towards a unique, I mentioned unique just now, tropical city. It must be designed for the tropical environment, and also of excellent, it must be world class. That was our goal. And you notice that Singapore is a garden city because our first Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, was very worried that Singapore, with our hot and humid environment, would not give a good environment, and as good as, say, Europe or China. And therefore, he feels that the least we should do is to plant as many trees as possible so that we give people shade. So that was a motivation. And actually, my understanding is because of our tree planting effort, our temperature in Singapore is lower by 4 to 6 degrees compared with Singapore without so many trees. So that it does help to improve the environment. Then my successor would set a different vision. I will not comment on that. So what is important in city planning, just now I emphasize, city planning is a serious thing. It's not just something that, because when you see a city planning, it's just a sheet of paper with colors on it. You can produce a plan within one day, but it's not as lighthearted as that. So, for example, when I prepared the Singapore Urban Master Plan, the 1991 concept plan, it took me 2 to 3 years to convert all the projections for schools, for hospitals, for parks and so on, into land areas and building areas. It took 2 or 3 years to do that. So we went through a long process of quantification, calculation, before we put the colors on the space. And in the process, I also felt that Singapore being such a small country with a lot of population, I projected a planning period of 100 years. Until today, most city plan anywhere in the world would plan for 15 to 25 years. Very few would plan longer than that. So I did for 100 years. And despite all that precaution, I projected that by 2091, we reached 5.5 million. But I didn't expect that we reached 5.5 million in 2016, 75 years ahead of time. Now, what does it mean? It means that the city, when your country's, your city's economy is doing well, no amount of government effort or authority can stop population growth. Unless the government says, I don't want economic growth. Now, which government would dare to say that? And therefore, I'm now saying to the press, when they ask me, said, what should we do? I said, we should plan for 10 million. But so far, Singapore government kept silent about this comment. Now, when you plan the city, you say, okay, I want to plan a city. First thing you ask is, what is a city? Because if you say, I want to draw an elephant, the first thing you ask is, what does an elephant look like? That's logical. If you don't know what an elephant looks like, how do you plan? How do you draw? But when you plan a city, very few people question, what is a city? Now, if you cannot describe what is a city, how do you plan? In fact, that's why today's emphasis is we must know the present. We must know what the city is, just like a doctor must know what the human body is like. You see, in fact, I asked many senior planners and senior planning professors one question. What is the optimal distance between two parallel expressways? I asked 6 or 7 of them. 0 number of them could give me an answer. So if you can't even answer a special, just like if you ask, you want to draw an elephant, what is the length of the nose of an elephant? If you can't answer that, how do you draw an elephant? So this is a big problem of city planning. So we need to, therefore I'm talking about urban planning, but I think whatever we do, understanding the present is a good start for the future. Anyway, I asked myself what was a city and constructed something like this. Okay. This is not from imagination. It's after discussing with a lot of people, after reading a lot of books, then I created. So the Singapore Master Plan, the concept was based on this construction. So after that, after having that construction, then I knew that to make the city work, we must know what are the right things to put in, how many of those, at the right amount, the right mixture, as well as put them at the right places. It's a scientific effort. And to do so, I created the basic urban structure, and then a series of plans. These are just the key ones. There are many, many other plans, but just show you the key ones. And when you put them together, then after that, you create a master plan. That's how it was done. So this is the basic concept. And the key thing here is that all the red and blue lines are the metro lines. We wanted this city to be metro or transit-oriented. Even as far back in 1991, we already realized that the car could not solve the traffic problem. We must have a heavy dependency on train and buses. So this was a basic structure of the Singapore plan. And then, of course, we identified the historical area, the green area, and also break down the cities, not as one body, but it's like a family. You have 5 regions and 25 new towns, and then put the new towns inside there. And of course, you have to link the new towns with expressways and metro line. And also put this, I call it urban organs, like the airports, petrochemical plants, and the heavy industrial areas. Put them at the right places, okay? And then after that, you put them all together, add them up together. And that became the basis of this plan. So what you see here, this plan, which all of you can claim you could do it in one day, actually behind that was all this research. Okay. Now, if you do a job well, in fact, if you do a job well for the city and give people good living environment, good functionality, good transportation, this kind of benefit would last for a long, long time. Okay? In fact, I asked a lot of foreign executives in Singapore. I said, why do you give up your big countries to come to a small place like Singapore? Within 3 seconds, 100% of them, I only interview about maybe 8 or 9, 100% of them said, because everything works in Singapore. Now that, to me, we're not talking about future ready, we're not talking about innovation, we're just talking about providing the basic need for the people properly, understanding what they need and provide properly. So anyway, just to show that this is what I think we receive by having put in the hard work. So ecology, I think you can see that the no flooding is a bit out of date. It flooded yesterday, but anyway, it flooded maybe for one day. In other countries, it flooded for several days, several weeks. And also it flooded in a small area. In other countries, it flooded probably for tens of square kilometers. Environment, because just now I talked about quantification, we quantify everything. So we have a space for all the people in Singapore, for all their activities needs. In planning, we calculated that, okay? And of course, no pollution and so on. Infrastructure, I think it works well. Yeah. It could be better, but generally for high density city, it works. And by 1985, we achieved these 4 phrases, which mainly through public housing, that few cities in the world can achieve. No squatters, they're totally gone. No homeless, everybody was assured to have a home. No ghettos, because through public housing, we mix them together. No ethnic enclaves, we mix them together. So you can accuse me for involving in social engineering. Yes, I was involved in social engineering, but actually no Singaporeans complain about that. They are happy with that. And economy is prosperous. Now, 93% of Singaporeans and permanent residents own their own homes. I think that is a record you don't see elsewhere in the world. First of all, nobody is homeless. Second, 93% of them own their own homes. Okay, and in the process of planning, we take care of the ethnic harmony. We take care of providing good education premises, and we take care of religious harmony. So, and therefore, we want a plan, a city plan, should be intelligent in the sense that when you move around in a city, you feel safe, you find that it's simple to use, comfortable to use, and so on. To my mind, that requires imagination, that requires future readiness. And because you plan well, you actually can have the cake and eat it. That's an English expression, a cake and it. That means you want everything. So despite our small country, we can do this. We're the second largest refining city. We had 30 golf courses. Now I think we may be left with only 28. And we are going to have 10 airstrips. Many of those are for military use. So despite the fact that population density has gone up more than double, Singapore, with high density and livability, we are both having high density and high livability. That achievements come by knowing what the city needs, understanding what the city should be in order to do it. Okay, high quality of living, and greenest city in Asia. Business friendly, because if everything works, people want to come and do business here. And you talk to Singaporeans, if you, outside your classes, you say, are you happy in Singapore? Most of them will say, not too happy. But other people think that we're happy. And in fact, an economist, the Economist magazine once said that Singapore has the best economy, good environment, no jobless, and yet Singaporeans are uniquely unhappy people. So that's not my opinion, it's the economist's opinion. I should have put it here to show you. But anyway, I think complaint is a characteristic of Singaporeans, but actually they have no right to complain because we are one of the top best nightlife city in the world, okay? So I want to urge all of you, make sure don't waste your presence in Singapore. Go to the night, enjoy our nightlife. So to put it more seriously, the Singapore stories can be summed up this way. The dark blue is the sea, the light blue is the sky. You must have good political leadership. Then you try to set goals. And one is how to improve people's life. One is how to improve the land's function. And you don't do it all in a hurry. You do it step by step. See, you do the most urgent things first, then you do the next thing, and then you do the next, and so on. And when you combine planning for people and planning for land, you actually create, nurture talented people and attract talents from around the world here. And when you do that, then what you see on the surface in Singapore today is that you have good ecology, good environment, good education, and so on. But in my mind, the ultimate goal of an urban planner is to raise the level of esteem of the people who live in the city. So this is, so what you see when you come to a city is the pink area in the sky. But to do so, you have to put in a lot of hard work below the surface. Otherwise, you cannot achieve it. So, how much time do I have? Okay, I'm going to race through the rest. Maybe I just want to say that a lot of people credit the good plan of Singapore to planners like me, but actually most important is the political leadership. So political leadership in a green patch, they must do what they need to do, set targets and do master plan. And then but you also need strong professionals to do it. And then, so the purpose of political leadership is to really design a perfect stage for people to use. Design the city as a perfect stage for people to use. And then leave the people to act out exciting drama in this stage. That is the purpose of urban planning. And that is the story of Singapore. This is how we did things. But in most other countries, especially developing countries, political leaders are preoccupied with architectural design and leaving no time to do planning or set targets. And then, of course, the developers would come in and give ideas to the country. This is the one good way to make sure you don't have a good city environment. And most cities behave like this. Okay, and I just want to add this one. So many people say that Singapore's government is autocratic, dictatorial. Yes, the Singapore government has strong power to implement their policies. But behind the strong powers, we actually constantly consulted grassroots people, CCCs and so on. And then when we know what they need, we then raise it for public discussion. After public discussion, getting feedback from them, then we formulate the policies. And after we formulate a policy and say we want to develop this project, we never fail to deliver what the government promised. Now, when you never fail to deliver what the government promised, then people believe in the government. That's how the government has an authority. So because in Singapore, every 5 years maximum, we must have a secret ballot re-election. So the government could not be so strong without delivery, without delivering good things to the people. So I just say that having a strong government is not automatically a dictatorial government. Behind that, there's a story to tell. I want you to understand this. Okay, and then maybe in the interest of time, I will just quickly go through. A city plan is like a family. You have grandparents, parents, and the children. And Singapore, we're a small city. We only have parents and all the children. And that's how we plan Singapore. You see, the whole country is like a parent. Now, if we only have treat it as one city, one piece of land, and not subdivide it into subunits in the family, then all the traffic will come to the central business district. That would not work. So we decided to carve Singapore up into 5 regions and then distribute the traffic to regional center. Still not good enough. We subdivide, then we create a new towns and bring the traffic into the new towns. That together with the MRT lines, linking all the commercial centers, explains why Singapore, despite the high density, the traffic congestion is not as bad as many other countries. So a city is one organ. You should not divide them. You have to treat them all as one. I think maybe in the interest of time, I stop here. Okay. In a few minutes? Oh, 10 minutes? Okay. Okay. The second thing I want to say that the skill of a planner is to translate words and data accurately into space. Now, that takes a lot of skill. So, a good planner must understand and meet the fundamental needs of the people. You see, a lot of my planning friends tell me that it's impossible to plan for long term. I disagree, because the basic human needs in a city has not changed for thousands of years. Your basic needs is home, jobs, education, shopping, industry, traffic, and so on, sports area, and transportation has not changed. What you need to know is what are their needs, and therefore create those spaces for them. So after you understand the basic needs, then you use technology to enhance it. Okay. So to my mind, the highest form of innovation in city planning is to understand the basic need of people and convert them into a master plan. So many people ask me, how do I plan a city well? I said you need 3 words: value, science, and art. You must have a humanist heart, scientist head, and artist eye. You have all these 3, you can plan. And of course, it's impossible to expect a human being to have all 3. So you must have a team of people with these talents. So in Singapore, the planning process was like this. You first plan the city, then you plan the region according to the city plan. Then you plan the new town according to the new town, the regional plan. Then you plan the neighborhood according to the new town plan. You take instruction from each land, and then you plan the precinct. And then after that, you design the architecture. Every part of Singapore was done this way. And when you're doing that, you actually modify your design, because when you see this, it looks very mechanical, soulless. But as you do the different parts, depending on the location, you will modify your design to create different flavors in the environment. That is the artistic part. So in short, we must have the right value for the benefit of people and land. And the scientists had to create a perfect machine for living. And the artist's eye to romance with the land. You must, every time you draw something on the drawing, on the paper, you must think about how the land would accept it, and then romance with it. When you do that, it's like a human being. A city would have outer beauty, inner beauty, and spiritual beauty. When you do that, then the people who live in the city will have a sense of nostalgia. They feel that they're in a healthy environment and a beautiful environment. So these are the key three words: value, science, and art. And of course, people say, can Singapore experience be used in other places? Yes, because planning practice is like language grammar. You know, I stand here talking to you in English, and you understand me because I use a correct English grammar. I can go to China or other places, speak in English, they all understand me. So if you understand the grammar of language, you can tell the story anywhere in the world. If you understand the good principle of planning, you can use it anywhere in the world. So just to show you in my 25 years in RSP, of course, I did many plans from neighborhood all the way to constellation cities. Constellation cities, the largest I've done 3 cities in China. Each is about 11 million population. Okay, using the same principle I use in Singapore. And then I also did some architectural work, okay, overseas. And so these are the places I've traveled to. And I think what is important when we do these plans is that just like no man is an island. A human being is part of a community. So when you do a piece of architecture or an urban plan, you should not treat it as independent. In fact, I see so many plans by architects and planners. If we ask to design a building, if a piece of paper is so big, you just draw whatever is here, and the rest of the paper is blank. If I see some urban planning, a piece of paper so big, they do the urban plan, and the rest is blank. To me, if a person does that, I guarantee him that he would not do a good design. Because you must, whenever you do something, you must relate to your surrounding. But 90% of the time, when I see an architect's plan or planner's plan, they create islands. They don't create a community. So, for example, when I did this plan, although it is, I relate this piece of land with surrounding. And this is it's next to Macau. It was built 14 years ago. Until today, it still fetches the highest price in the city. Because if you plan, relate with the surrounding environment, take advantage of features of surrounding environment, and plan your architecture well, it helps you make a lot of money. Okay. And this one is in Guilin. Okay. This is, of course, a beautiful resort place, 50 bungalows. And if you go up to that area and look out, so it's taking advantage of the environment. This is a cultural center in northern China. It's known as the international capital of kites. So I use the theme of kites to plan this area. And it's one of the top opera houses and concert halls in China today. In Russia, I planned a new town, and now they're happily building. So they're inviting me to go back to see the results in May when the weather is not so cold. And this is one of the largest cities I've done. This is the existing plan. You cannot tell the relationship between the parts of a city. So first of all, I divide them into 2 cities, 3 regions, then 2 cities and 3 regions. And then under the city, I subdivide them into 11 regions. And under the regions, I divide them in 68 new towns, and then put in the industrial areas to make sure they would not interfere with the living environment. All the pink areas are historical areas, some of them only about 2,500 years old, historical areas. So this plan that you just saw is like this, you know. And then, but below that plan, I had to do a more detailed planning. So that's a small box there, and I also have to do the central business district. It's like so every time you plan, you must say to yourself, what is the relation of this piece of land to the larger environment? It's just like if a person is going to marry into a family, first thing you ask is, where am I in this family? Who are the uncles? Who are the brothers and sisters? You must understand that so that you know how to fit into the family. City planning is the same thing. And finally, you recognize this place. Okay, so this was I analyzed this site with the environment, and then did a sketch to see how we can fit in, okay? And also did a sketch to see how it can climb up this hill. And then actually, again, we did a long-term one. We include the future expansion, as you can see on the left. And then finally, did a sketch, and then this is the building as we are in today. So, a closing remark is, I think for city, but I think we should not just confine ourselves to city planning. I think it's important for every one of us to develop solid skill. We must understand what we are doing, define what we're doing, and then we must understand the rationales behind what we're doing. And then that, to my mind, solid skill is the definition of imagination and innovation. And coming back to urban planning is a doctor to a sick city, okay? And but a doctor simply look at the human body already created by God. The challenge to urban planners, you are the creator yourself. You have to create something which makes sense out of nothing. That is a bigger challenge, okay? So the Singapore planning I said earlier is a planning and laboratory, and particularly in Asia, Asian cities have very high densities. So that's why a lot of my plans are done in Asia, partly because there's a huge demand of urban planning in Asia, and partly because when they come to Singapore, they see that we can create high-density environment and yet good environment. That's a very useful lesson. This is a painting done by my father in 1967, National Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this lesson of Singapore, architecture of Singapore. That's a great honor to receive you this morning. Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions, if you don't mind. So, very hard to say a question.
Hello, thank you very much. I want to ask you about the relation between Singapore and the old European cities full of history. Well, two things. For Singapore, because Singapore had to be built really fast and it was very particular, but did you have any source of inspiration from the old cities of the old world, like in Europe? And second thing is, can city planners in Europe with those old cities with huge heritage and legacy, can they take a leaf from your book in Singapore? Can they learn those lessons? Can they try to organize the same in their cities? Thank you.
Well, I must say this, that I greatly enjoy going to European cities because you have such a long history of heritage. And European cities, because Europe have become urbanized for a long, long time. So the people, the political leaders and the people in European cities, even though they did not go through urban planning training, but instinctively they know what is the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. And I really appreciate that they keep their historical building because instinctively they knew what to do. I think the big disruption to European cities is the modernity, the new technology, the high-rise buildings, and a much more complex nationality mix. And therefore, the modern part of European city, to my mind, even though all the theory that I showed you just now originated from Europe, but I call my theory as Asianized European urban theories. But in Europe, I'm afraid that they have not progressed further. So the new part of European city, to me, are not as good as the older part. So my view is that by all means, and I urge that you should keep saving all the historical buildings. They are just totally gorgeous. But the new part of a city, I think you have to learn how to cope with the modern urban challenges.
Thank you. You have another question?
Hello, yes. Thank you so much for your talk, fascinating topic. And I was curious about something. You said you planned it for 100 years instead of 20 or 15 years. And with hindsight, would you recommend us to always plan for 100 years or to plan for a shorter term? Because you said afterwards that your prediction for the population was meant 75 years before the deadline. So isn't it a bit dangerous to plan so far ahead? And what should we do?
Well, if I do have a little bit urban hearing problem, so, but I think I understand your question. And you see, nowadays in China, I plan to 2070, they all accept, because there's a UN report saying that by 2075, the urban population, the world population would double from what we have today. And the Earth can no longer sustain any more population. And we have to really do a serious population growth control. So if I plan for 2070, it's almost like planning for the ultimate plan, okay? Now, why do I want to plan for long-term plan? The way I explain to most people is that if your city would ultimately grow to be a phoenix, then you should plan for that phoenix. And then you do a phasing plan, staging plan, from a long term to mid-term to present term. So that you let this phoenix grow from today to the future, from a small phoenix to medium-sized phoenix to larger-sized phoenix to fully grown phoenix. And Singapore, there was an attempt to do that. That's why when you are in Singapore, you don't feel a lot of clashes of ideas. They fit in nicely. That's why I'm advocating that we should plan for 10 million. So they plan, this phoenix is undersized. We have to plan for a bigger size phoenix. And most cities, when you plan short term, you actually, to my mind, it's like planning 50 turkeys. If you combine 50 turkeys together, will it become a phoenix? It will never become a phoenix. That's why a lot of modern cities are so chaotic. Okay? And therefore, I would still advocate we should plan for long term, but after planning for long term, you do a staging plan. And in Singapore, we did the same. I planned for 100 years, Then I show them how much land we need for 50 years, how much land we need for 30 years, how much land we need for 15 years. Yeah, your foreseeable horizon is 15 years, there's no doubt. So Singapore grew that way, but instead of taking 100 years to grow, we took only about 30 odd years to grow. Yeah.
We have two more questions. Last question, one here,
Hello.
and then
Hello. Thank you very much for your incredible talk. I have a question. You said to build a good city, you must be an urban doctor, an urban creator. Do you consider yourself as a scientific artist because your father was a painter? And what do you think is more important during user creation between planning and creation?
Between what?
The scientific side and the artistic side.
Well, you need all of them. You need all of them. But because a city, first of all, you must know what you're planning for. That's why I use a humanist heart. Basically, the purpose of urban planning is, the purpose of urban planning can be condensed to just two words: for people, for land. That's all. That means you have to create a livable environment for the people. And you must make sure that this piece of land you're planning is ecologically sound, is environmentally good, is functionally working. So just for these two. But having set this goal, how do you create this environment? You must have a head of a scientist or the head of a mechanics to know what are the different parts you need and so on. So but after you create this model of a perfect machine for living, you have to learn how to put this machine on the land, because the land is not just a piece of empty land. It's got the hills and a river. How do you fit that in? You still need the artist's eyes. In fact, the one plan that I did where I could almost put the machine directly on the land without having to modify too much is in Saudi Arabia. I did the King Abdullah Economic City next to the Red Sea. On that piece of land, I only found two things: sand and camels. So
last question. We have to include the last question. Kimberly.
Hello, and thank you for your talk. I actually have two questions. I'll try to be quick. The first question is, there's a huge difference between Singapore now and Singapore in 1965, and it seems like that evolution was brought about very quickly. So I was wondering, basically, where did the money come from to fund the urban redesigning? Where did the resources come from? And my second question is sort of in the continuity of Gautier's question. We've reached the 5.7 million population 75 years early. What are the new challenges that we face today in continuing the redesign of the city in order to adapt to this increasing population?
what was the second question?
First question is...
No, second.
The second question is, since we've reached...
75 years earlier.
Your 100-year plan 75 years early, and the population is continuing to grow, how do we adapt to that, and what are the next challenges that we face?
Next phase. Okay. The first question, if I understand correctly, is where do we get the money to build this? Very simple. When you plan a city, you plan for the need of the people and land. You don't plan for your capability. Because if you plan according to how much money you have, you will never get a good plan. And Singapore is a good example. In 1971, when we were still very poor, still lots of slum, our 1971 concept plan already put in the metro lines, already put in. At that time, we had no money to develop. We waited till 1982 when we had the money. But when we had that money, the metro line was already, the land was already purchased. The squatters along the land was already clear, so we can move in. If we did not plan those lines in 71, by 1982, when we had the money, we have no land to develop. So for planning, you plan for the needs. You never plan for your capability. The second one is about
next generation, next population, how the population will grow, and how could you manage that? How is it possible to manage the growth population?
Well, it's not easy to manage population growth. Like Singapore, the reason I said 5.5 million in 100 years was because at that time we were still economically not strong, and economic growth was slow, and therefore the job growth was slow, and therefore population growth was slow. But I didn't expect the growth rate went so fast. In fact, about 6 or 7 years ago, in one particular year, we had a growth rate of 14%, which is shocking. And there's a huge upsurge of population size. So the lesson I learned is that when you plan, of course you plan for the need, not the capability. You also plan for a more optimistic projection of population, because no amount of government power can stop population growth. One good example is China. China has this hukou system. That means every person is registered his location of his address in different townships and so on, in order to control the population movement. And yet, China, Shanghai, Beijing, and so on, despite the hukou system, cannot control the population growth, because that's where the economic activities are. So we must not entertain the idea that government can control population growth. You can't, unless you don't want economic growth.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your talk. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.